I'm with Professor Jake Lynch here in Stavanger, Norway. Thank you very much for your speech this afternoon. I'd like to begin by asking you maybe to give us a little bit of your background, especially how you came to peace journalism and your work in developing it as a field.
Yeah, well, I was working as a very junior producer at the BBC, and it came to the point in 1991 where the Americans and their allies launched Operation Desert Storm in Iraq. And it was before the days when the BBC had its own 24-hour news channel. There was CNN. It was the war that launched CNN onto the global consciousness. So instead the BBC devised what they called a rolling programme, and that was to follow on from the lunchtime news for a few hours. And I was made a member of the production team for that programme. And we would exchange ideas and sort of get lists of guests and themes the programme could concentrate on, etc. But as time went by, it began to occur to me that the angles of most interest to me were the ones that never actually made it onto the programme. So that's what really first alerted me to the fact that something is going on here, there's some kind of agenda here, and it requires some remedial action. So then, when several years later my career had moved on and I was a reporter by then for Rupert Murdoch's Sky News, I met Johan Galtung, and he started talking about peace journalism, and we hosted a summer school at Taplow Court in the UK to discuss peace journalism, and invited several senior British journalists along to compare notes and to try to bring about some cross-fertilisation. And really then the work on peace journalism began, and we had a single sheet of paper from Johan. It was a table of setting out the characteristics of war journalism and peace journalism. And really speaking, my work on peace journalism ever since has been to expand and build on that table as best I can.
Mm-hmm. Could you describe what is on that table of characteristics, especially for peace journalism?
Yeah, well, peace journalism is distinguished from the mainstream of conflict coverage insofar as usually what we might get is a very intensive report of an episode in a conflict, a violent event typically, an exchange of fire or a bomb goes off, something like that, and we get a very kind of detailed description of what it looks like, what it sounds like, and the effects of it. What we don't get so much of is background and context. We don't inquire into the root causes of a conflict. Journalism usually behaves as if the cause of the conflict can be found where the violent incident takes place. There is insufficient curiosity as to the broader conflict formation. So peace journalism finds creative ways to bring in those kinds of angles. That's the first thing. Second thing is, once you do that, you render a conflict intelligible. That is, it makes it transparent so we can see what's going on underneath, and then it begins to make sense to talk about solutions. In other words, the next episode need not be another episode of violence. It could be a creative solution to attend to injustice or inequality or the grievances of the particular party concerned. Then, really speaking, the other main distinguishing characteristic between war journalism and peace journalism is that there is a general bias in favour of official sources of information. And so therefore, where important perspectives are being nurtured and developed from outside the charmed circle of official sources, they don't generally make it into the news. And in any conflict, there are abundant peace perspectives and peace initiatives which are developed long before politicians start to repeat them. And peace journalism is about picking those up and retailing them into the public sphere to try to speed up the process whereby they can attain a foothold in public debate. The other point about peace journalism is that, as with the Peace Channel, for example, journalism usually packs its bags and leaves after an episode of direct violence dies down. And that's a shame, because as with the Peace Channel video, they've gone back to Kenya sometime after the electoral violence a few months ago, and they've found that there are many inspiring stories of people who are now reconciling, and stories that hold important lessons for many of us in the rest of the world. And if it were not for the determination to go back and cover that, we would never hear about them.
Mm-hmm. In your speech you mentioned unarticulated resistance, and I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that. What is the resistance, and also why is it unarticulated?
Well, journalism is conventional and must be so to a large extent because it has to give a quick response or often an instant response to a story. So journalists can't think through how they're going to respond to each story from first principles every time. Journalism is governed by convention. And what that means is that journalists are not generally likely to scrutinise exactly how their reports are being put together. And also, in particular, the branch of the media where I spent most of my career in television is not usually sharing that information with the viewer. There was a famous television newsreader in the States called Walter Cronkite, and his sign-off at the end of every night's bulletin was, "That's the way it is." And that's what television news in particular, and news in general, generally tells us. That's the way it is. It doesn't inquire into how it came to be that way. And so, therefore, the resistance to change is unarticulated because journalists generally do not indulge in the degree of critical self-awareness to come to terms with the way their journalism is put together. So therefore, they are not generally receptive to the proposition that it could be put together differently. And what has to happen is for journalists to get the space to reflect critically on their own work and to be supplied with perspectives based on research which actually demonstrate the patterns of omission and distortion that result from the application of these conventions. And once they do that, then they have the wherewithal to inspect their journalism from the outside and hopefully change it.
And finally, I'd like to ask you the same question that I proposed to the sponsors of Peace Channel, the World Trade Association gentlemen, which was, what is the definition of peace?
Well, you can define peace in various different ways, and these are definitions from Johan Galtung again, as so many are. When the guns fall silent, you can have negative peace, but that could leave the underlying causes of conflict unaddressed. So what we need for positive peace is the observation of human rights and the attainment of human rights by people, the positive action to overcome injustice, and the abundance of equitable conflict handling mechanisms. Conflict doesn't go away. What's at stake is the way we respond to it. And if a society has the means to respond non-violently in ways that involve the mass of people being able to access the process, then it is a society with peace.
Thank you very much.